If you were here last week, I appreciate Dayton taking the class for me, getting us started on the class on the minor prophets. I'm getting started this morning. We're going to be talking about Hosea. We won't get through it. It's 14 chapters, but we're going to try to cover some of the high points. However, I'll go ahead and give you a heads up. I may not be here next Sunday now. I got a call yesterday, and my sister's husband, Don, died. We've been praying for him. He's had cancer and sort of looking forward to this. And he had asked me if I'd do his service. So we're going to try to make it down to Georgia and see if we can get that done. And that might mean I'm not here next Sunday. I don't know that yet, but it's just happened last night. So at any rate, I don't want to start on a downer announcing a death. But if you think about it, he's a member of the kingdom of the Lord. He just obeyed the gospel about 10 years ago, so that changes everything. All right. And that has a lot to do with what we're talking about in Hosea this morning. I don't know how familiar you are with Hosea. For the sake of memory, I've jokingly referred to him as the Mexican prophet. Sometimes when you add a little humor or something weird, it'll click a little better in your mind. And I've also referred to Malachi as the Italian prophet. And there's a Mexican prophet at the beginning of the minors and an Italian prophet at the end of the minors. So it's Hosea to Malachi. And that's those four. Now, the ones in between, who's the second prophet listed in the minors as we have them in our English Bible? Joel. Well, everybody knows who Billy Joel is, and that's two names. So Joel is the second of the minor prophets. And who's the third? Anybody ever heard the radio program Amos and Andy? Okay, so there's three words, Amos and Andy. Obadiah, he doesn't go with anything, but he's got 4 syllables in his name. So it's Hosea, Joel, Amos, and Obadiah. Now you got the first 4 of the minor prophets in order. And then for some reason, I just think of the next 3 pretty much automatically. It's Jonah, Micah, Nahum. Jonah, Micah, Nahum. I don't know why, but that sticks in my mind. So now we got the first 7, or at least I've got the first 7. Well, who's number 8? He's a weird one. Who? Tobacco. See that? Yeah, I know. But I said that for a reason, because I think of Habakkuk as tobacco. So there's Jonah, Micah, Nahum, and I think Nahum, that's a weird name. Why is he weird? Well, he's weird because he chose that tobacco, that Habakkuk. So now I've got the first 8. And then, what are the last 4? Well, we know Malachi, if you will, is the last one. But there's 2 Z names. What are the Z names? Zephaniah and Zechariah. And they're switched up alphabetically. Who should be first? Zechariah should be first, but it's all goofed up. So Zephaniah is first, and then there's somebody in between them. Hey, guy, what are you doing in between Zephaniah and Zechariah? Those 2 Z's ought to be together, but hey, there's some guy, hey, guy, between Zephaniah and Zechariah, and then you come to Malachi or Malachi. So how long have we been here? Now, if your mind is weird enough, like mine, that'll stick with you, and you'll have a pretty good handle on the order of the prophets. And if we don't get anything else done today, maybe at least that was worth being here just for that. Because when I was much younger, I struggled with memorizing the books of the Bible, and somebody always comes up and they jokingly say something like, turn to 2nd Hezekiah, and you go, what? Yeah, that's not a book. That was one of the kings, not a book of the Bible. But it sounds biblical because it is biblical, but it's just not a book of the Bible. But those minor prophets, we're just not as familiar with them, are we? Somebody says Isaiah. Oh, we know Isaiah. Jeremiah, yes. Elijah, yes. Even though Elijah never had a volume of work attributed to him, we know Elijah. He was one of the major prophets, if you will, as far as his impact on Israel's history goes. But the ones we call minor, and I wasn't here last week, of course, but I'm sure Dayton made the point that they're not really minor. They're not really minor. Whenever God says something, there's nothing minor about it. And so these guys are called minor. I'm not sure. Did you cover that reason last week? The possibilities of. Right, exactly. And then if you hear the joke, somebody said they're called minor prophets because they just had peripheral visions. I thought that was funny. At least it's better than what some people have proposed. They are shorter typically, but Hosea is not short. It's 14 chapters. But he's got a very interesting message. Let's do a little reading in Hosea. Read with me the first 5 verses. The word of the Lord came to Hosea, the son of Beeri, during the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and during the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. When the Lord first spoke through Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, "Go take yourself a wife of harlotry, and have children of harlotry, for the land commits flagrant harlotry, forsaking the Lord." So he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. And the Lord said to him, "Name him Jezreel, for yet a little while, and I will punish the house of Jehu for the bloodshed of Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. On that day I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel." This is the beginning of Hosea's word of prophecy. And it's not a pleasant beginning. What does God tell Hosea to do? And why does he tell him to do it? He said, "I want you to get married." Now, what other prophet did God say, "Hey, I want you to go out and get married"? This was what God told Hosea. Go get married. Who's he supposed to marry? Find you a woman that won't be faithful. What father has ever told his son, go find a woman that won't be faithful? But what is Hosea's job at this point? His job, his function, is to serve as a message to Judah. He's going to be talking about Israel as well. But his message is to serve as a sign to them. And so he's going to go marry this girl. And what's her name? Gomer. I know. I've seen the show. Maybe she could at least sing. I don't know. But that's not what, those kinds of things are not what the Lord's concerned with. What he's concerned with is her character, which is very lacking. But why does God have him marry a woman who's lacking in character? She is the image of Israel to God. Israel is unfaithful to God. She will not be faithful. That's what Hosea's prophecy is all about. It's all about Israel's unfaithfulness. Now, it's not all about that, as I say. What you see in Hosea is this: God's coming to punish you because you've been evil. You've been like a faithless wife, going out and forsaking your husband and living it up with all kinds of different lovers. But once the Lord punishes you, he's going to bring you back. He's going to woo you. That's what God says through Isaiah. He's going to speak kindly to her and bring her back, going to buy her back. He's going to have Hosea go down and buy back his wife. She's left him, gone off having escapades with all these other men and wound up in the slave market being sold, and he buys her back. Went and got her the first time, buys her back the second time. And it's a picture of God working with his people. How did Israel come to be a nation in the first place? And he'll deal with this internally. I'm going through all this kind of generally because I know we're not going to get through all 14 chapters today. That's not the plan. Okay, bought them from slavery. They were slaves in Egypt. They went down, 75 people. They came out. There were over 600,000 fighting men when they came out 400 years later. And he brought them out of slavery. How did he bring them out? To send an army down there, right? Send an 80-year-old shepherd. What was his great weapon? A stick. A stick that was big enough to be a staff. That's how God delivered them the first time. And that's That's what God is going to liken all of this relationship with his people to throughout Hosea's prophecy. It's very fascinating, and nothing has really changed. I mean, here in the 21st century, we look back and say, well, those horrible Israelites, how unfaithful they were. Guess which state in the nation is number 5, ranked number 5 for divorce in the United States? Oklahoma. Yeah, Oklahoma. Now, I know that's the state, that's not the church. But I was really surprised when I heard that, because I thought, Oklahoma? I know the people of Oklahoma. We're good people. But there's a lot of unfaithfulness going on. There's a lot of something going on that's caused all these marriages to break up. And bless your hearts, I know a lot of you have been through a lot of that, and it's heartbreaking. It's killer on you. And it's not something that, well, it's over when the papers are signed. No, it continues. And that's what God deals with in Hosea, is the heartbreak of that kind of trouble in the relationship, that kind of dysfunction. But the positive thing of Hosea is, no matter how bad the breakup is and how bad the loss of character is, God is always there to say, I'm coming for you, I love you, you're going to be mine. And this is what he shows through Hosea. Go marry a wife of harlotry, have children with her, and then watch her go off and love other men. And then you go back and you buy her back, and you love her again, and you woo her, and you care for her. At first he says, take a wife of harlotry, but then he goes and he says, love her. He's already taken her once, she's left, so he's not going to take her again. He's going this second time to love her. Those are the words that God uses through the prophet Hosea. All right, let's look at these kids. Verse 6. And we're not going verse by verse. We're just starting this in the first chapter to get the flavor of the prophecy. She conceived again. Who was the first child? What was his name? Jezreel. The word Jezreel means God sowed. What do you do when you sow? What do you expect? You expect a harvest. Whatever you plant, you're going to get it back. And so God is sowing. And in this case, it's not a very good thing, because he's going to punish the bloodshed of Jehu in Jezreel. So that's the first child. God sowed. And you might question, you go out and you holler for your kids. I don't know if this is what happened with Hosea, but my mom would come out, Marty, supper time. And all right, I did home. Can you imagine Hosea going out? Jezreel, God sowed. Oh, wonder what God sowed. Well, look at these other kids. What if he's calling the other kids? She conceived again and gave birth to a daughter, and the Lord said to him, name her Lo-ruhamah, for I will no longer have compassion on the house of Israel. What was that child's name? It was unpitied, unloved. God sowed, unpitied, unloved. Come home to supper. What was the next kid's name? Verse 9, the Lord said, name him Lo-ami, which means not my people. God sowed, unpitied, unloved, not my people. Those were the names that might have been called out from Hosea's doorstep. And people knew this prophet's kids' names, because who would name their children such things? Do you hear what's probably in the papers? Do you hear what he named his kids? Well, that's the message to the people. It's like Jesus said of the gospel. It's not going to be whispered under the cover somewhere. It's going to be shouted from the housetops. And God, through Hosea, is shouting from the housetops, this is a relationship. Where'd these children come from? They came from a wife of harlotry. He bought her as a harlot, had children with her, and this is what their names are. Yet look at verse 10. Already he's coming back. Yet the number of the sons of Israel will be like the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. And in the place where it is said of them, you are not my people, it will be said to them, you are the sons of the living God. And the sons of Judah, the sons of Israel, and the sons of Israel will be gathered together, and they will appoint for themselves one leader, and they will go up from the land for great will be the day of Jezreel. Wipe these glasses off a little bit here. So we're just into the first chapter. This is the end of the first chapter. And he said, here's the bad part. Our relationship with Israel is so horrible. She's so faithless. that I'm going to show Israel this through through you, Hosea, marrying a wife of harlotry and having children, and you're going to give them these names to show the people what I'm thinking of them. But there's going to be a return. Things are going to get better. All right, chapter 2. Look at the first 3 verses. Say to your brothers, Ami. What does that mean? What's that? You are my people. And Ruhamah, to the sisters, what's that mean? She's obtained compassion. So it's reversed. There's hope. There's light at the end of this dark tunnel. Contend with your mother. Contend. She's not my wife, and I'm not her husband, and let her put away her harlotry from her face, her adultery from between her breasts, or I will strip her naked and expose her as on the day when she was born. I will also make her like a wilderness, make her like a desert land, and slay her with thirst. Boy, that sounds kind of rough, doesn't it? Yeah, the Assyrians were rough. God is eventually going to bring the Assyrians on Israel, the 10 northern tribes. And they were horrible to their captives. Those they didn't kill probably wish they had been killed. They carried them off into captivity, and the 10 northern tribes existed no more. And he would eventually, about 120 years after that, he would bring Babylon on Judah. All of this because both of these groups of people decided that they would no longer be faithful. And that's what this is all about. Look at verse 14. Therefore, behold, I will allure her. Bring her into the wilderness and speak kindly to her. I will give her the vineyards from there, and the valley of Achor as a door of hope, and she will sing there as in the days of her youth, as in the day when she came up from the land of Egypt. What's he talking about? In chapter 2, he's described how she's so unfaithful and faithless and harlotrous. She keeps continuing in her harlotry. But here he's saying, I'm going to woo her. I'm going to allure her. I'm going to bring her back, and I'm going to treat her good and kindly. And she's going to return to the person she once was. There's always hope, no matter how dark it gets, because of God's promise of punishment. And think about this. You and I are just people. So if we see something going on that's not right, maybe we'll think, well, it's none of my business. And I have the authority to make a difference. I don't have the authority to step in and try to make a change. So I just have to walk away because we're just people. We're small. We don't have that kind of authority and power. But God is God. When he sees injustice, his nature obligates him to eventually do something about that injustice. He does not have the freedom to walk away because he is God. He must answer sin. He must answer injustice. Now, his answer may not come in the same time that we think it should come, but it will come. It will come. God always answers injustice. He has to because of his nature. And so you and I can walk away from it, but God cannot. He will always answer the evil. He will always answer the sin. That's what Jesus is about, and that's what the judgment is about. Everybody who deserves a comeuppance will get their comeuppance. Everybody whom God grants mercy through his Son will be granted mercy. None of us will deserve it, but we will get it. Not because we are good, but because he is good. And that's what he's showing through Hosea. Hosea is not going to allure Gomer back because Gomer is such a fine catch. He's going to allure her back because God is telling him, love her, love her, love her. That's what God does with us. Aren't you glad? Aren't you glad? That's what God does with us. We're looking at this. I read this and I think, yeah, this was 2,700 years ago. It's the same thing today. This was all the way across on the other side of the world. But this is Oklahoma County, Choctaw, Oklahoma, USA. It's today, it's now, and it's here. We are just as tempted to be unfaithful as Israel was. She was led away by Egypt, by Assyria, by other nations, and all they had to offer, their gods, their customs, their cultures. Look at our country today. Who are we enamored with as a country? Anybody but us. Whatever the Canadians do, whatever the Europeans do, now it's whatever they do in Mexico, whatever they do anywhere is superior, and you can see it everywhere. People will post things on Facebook, oh, this is how they do it in this country, and this is how they do it in this country. I remember being in school, and I didn't point this out to the instructor, but I probably should have. He was talking about doing mission work in a Central American country and how much he enjoyed it and how they ate beans out of a bowl and used a tortilla and would wipe the bean juice. Oh, the bean juice, yeah. You know what I'm talking about if it's got some onions and garlic in it. Anyway, wipe that juice up with, how do I always talk about food? I don't understand this, but I wasn't even planning on talking about this, but it just kind of came up. And wipe that stuff up with that tortilla and eat. And said, it's so much better than licking it off a fork. And he said it with disdain. And I realized later, you know, I don't think he even realized that he was slapping my culture in the face because we eat with forks. Now,
that's because we can afford it. They couldn't.
Well, yeah, they probably, if they ever could afford it, they'd probably get some forks. Right. Now, there's nothing at all wrong with talking about how great it is to get that juice with the tortilla. But in the process of glorifying that, you don't have to knock something else. And sometimes that's what we do in this country. It's this either or thing that we always, which is better? Which is better? Well, why do we have to ask which is better? What's good? Which is better, chicken or steak? Well, it depends on the day for me. How about you? Some days I want chicken, believe it or not, over steak. Now, if it's chicken fried steak, you got the best of both worlds. So, at any rate, God is trying to get his people to see that he loves them, and he's going to take great pains to bring them back in spite of the embarrassment. He never uses that kind of terminology. The humiliation, he never talks about that.
The beginning of all this was when they did not drive all the people out of Canaan like he's told them to.
Right.
They left thousands and thousands of them that should have been wiped out.
Right.
Because he told them, if you don't do it, you will be influenced
Right.
by their, by the way they live, by their lifestyle. And they were. They went to idolatry and other terrible things that they brought into their own justice.
Exactly. And if you go back to, I'll go back to Leviticus, I think it's 18, there might be 20, let's see. One of the things that God pointed out to Abraham, and the Jews worshiped Abraham, was that he wasn't bringing his people back into Canaan until hundreds of years later because the iniquity of the Amorites was not yet complete. So that should have put the seed thought in their mind. We're going into Canaan because the iniquity of the Amorites is now complete and God is bringing judgment. This is how God does judgment often. He brings nations in. We talked about Assyria and Babylon that he brought on Israel and Judah, but he also took Israel out of Egypt and in the process gave a judgment on Egypt, and then he brought them into Canaan to bring a judgment on Canaan. And when God wants a judgment done, you better execute that judgment. And they didn't. They failed, as Steve said. So when we read about the kinds of things, the sexual sins that God forbid the Israelites to take part in the law, we read about how the land has tossed out, has spewed out the people of Canaan. Let's see. Here we are. It's chapter 18. Did I say 18? Leviticus 18. You can start reading, and he's talking about all these things where this is not the way to have sex. The way to have sex is a man marrying a woman, and together in that relationship you have sex. Everything else is fornication. Fornication. And this is important because we're talking about Hosea marrying Gomer, and she goes off and have fornication. This is what the land has been doing. And after all of this, verse 24, Leviticus 18:24, Do not defile yourselves by any of these things, for by all these the nations which I am casting out before you have become defiled. For the land has become defiled. Therefore I have brought its punishment upon it, so that the land has spewed out its inhabitants. But as for you, you are to keep my statutes and my judgments, and shall not do any of these abominations, neither the native nor the alien who sojourns among you. For the men of the land who have been before you have done all these abominations, and the land has become defiled, so that the land will not spew you out. Should you defile it as it has spewed out the nation which has been before you. So this idea, this imagery of the nation spitting out, or the land spitting out the people, is because of their abominable sexual behavior. And I'm reading this, and I'm reading Hosea, and I'm thinking, what's it like in our country today? How much longer do we have? We think we need to preach the gospel for the salvation of people we love, our neighbors and our friends. We need to preach the gospel for the salvation of our nation. It may not come, but whatever happens at the end, I want somebody to be able to stand up and say, I remember when Marty Kessler preached the gospel. He told people the truth. I hope that's what they're able to say when this is all said and done. Bud?
Have you ever heard this statement, though? Picture, if you will.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what we do. As preachers, we have to create a picture for people to visualize, and sometimes it gets plumb gross.
It does. Very
so
gross.
We have to get them to visualize mentally what's going to take place, and it's not because we say it, but because we get a visual picture of it. And what happens is that people remember what you visualized at that time, and they'll come back to you and they'll say, Marty said this, or he said that, or he gave us a picture of this, and it was real. You know.
They try to do that on commercials. Have you seen that commercial where the lady's sitting on the couch with her dog and there's a big flea, or is it a mite, or it's a big monstrous thing? It says, what if you could see the things that are on your animal and in your furniture? It's like, oh.
My latest one is this. Little girl watching her mother wash the dishes or rinse the dishes and puts them in the dishwasher.
Yeah.
And she says, what does the dishwasher do?
Yeah.
And you know what I'm saying? Boy, we all need to be asking that question, you know.
Yeah.
And it's to visualize, what are you doing? What are you doing with your life? And that's exactly what you're doing right now. You're telling us, say, take a look at your life. And I remember my grandfather at one time was always saying, don't be such a gomer. And I never knew what that meant. I said, you know, what does he mean? What does he mean?
Now we know. But I hope we're all getting older and wiser. And that was the intent of this message of Hosea, for Israel to wise up. Here's an illustration of my relationship with you. Can you see who you are in this picture? What are you going to do about it? In chapter 3, we've already done chapter 3 sufficiently, I guess. But in chapter 4, starts out saying, listen to the word of the Lord, O sons of Israel, for the land has a case against the inhabitants of the land. The land has a case against the inhabitants of the land, because there's no faithfulness or kindness or knowledge of God in the land. There's swearing, deception, murder, stealing, adultery. They employ violence so that bloodshed follows bloodshed. Therefore the land mourns, and everyone who lives in it languishes, although the beasts of the field and the birds of the, along with the beasts of the field and the birds of the sky, and also the fish of the sea disappear. Let no one find fault, yet let no one find fault, and let none offer reproof, for your people are like those who contend with the priest. So you'll stumble by day, prophet will stumble with you by night, and I will destroy your mother. My people are destroyed. How? For lack of knowledge. Because you've rejected knowledge. I'll also reject you from being my priest. Since you have forgotten the law of your God, I will forget your children. When you look at today's and I bring this up because it's in the news all the time. When you look at the political climate of our nation, it's not simply that people have forgotten God. It's that they have forgotten common sense. Just plain old common sense. And I'm not sure how it got that name, common sense, because it's really not that common when you think about it. But I think the idea behind common sense is that it should be. Regardless of your education, you should have enough sense to know that you don't look for gasoline with a lighted match. It's just common sense. You just don't do that kind of thing. You don't try to get rid of a hornet's nest by reaching up and grabbing it. There's just some things that ought to be common knowledge. And Israel is destroyed. But what's destroyed them? Ignorance. Ignorance. Peter talked about those who were willingly ignorant. You know what that means? A guy said, I heard him say it, dumb on purpose. Willingly ignorant. I'm willing to not know what I really need to know, so I'm being dumb on purpose. No accountability. And if you got no accountability, you're no account. That's pretty much what it comes down to. I just throw that in there for free. I like that. But look at verse 17. This is one of the saddest passages in all of the Bible. Hosea 4:17. Ephraim is joined to idols. Let him alone. In other words, hopeless. Leave him alone. Oh, Billy, you had your hand up a while ago.
It's the fact, the truth of the matter of the fact is, all the knowledge we need about God is in His Word pertaining to God. We just need to have the initiative to study and read and understand and come to the knowledge of the truth and obey it. Israel had the knowledge there through the prophets being taught to them. It's saying, God's wanting you to turn back to me. He's a jealous God. You should understand He's a jealous God. Look what's happened to you. You know, so come back. And when they sin or when we sin, we need to come back also. The truth of the matter is, it's in God's Word. We can figure it out.
Absolutely. And it's not complicated at all. I mean, we can look at the sacrificial system and that looks complicated. But if you go to Matthew 23, Jesus was rebuking the scribes and Pharisees and everybody who thought like them. But he made mention of something that he called the weightier matters of the law. And this is what he said. Verse 23, Matthew 23:23. Woe to you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites! You tithe mint and dill and cumin. What were those? Those were herbs, little plants and spices. You'll take these little plants and you'll tithe those. You'll bring off a tenth. But you have neglected the weightier provisions of the law. Are some laws more important than others? Apparently so, because these are called weighty. These are heavy parts of the law. What are the weighty parts of the law? Justice, mercy, faithfulness. If you've paid attention to what Hosea has decried as the sins of Judah and Israel, it's all three of these. There's no justice being done between people. There is no mercy. Faithfulness, you got to be kidding me. That's why he had her marry Gomer, a woman of harlotry, and take a wife of harlotry. So it's the same thing all the time. It's not like it changes from one century to the next. Culture changes, technology changes, spiritual nature of people and their relationship with God never changes. Yes?
One point that I would love to make is that God told him to take her and love her.
Yes.
And this is not romantic love. This is a love that goes beyond these physical things that are going on. And that is the love that God has for us, no matter what. And so that was that nebulous thing that would overcome these acts, these physical acts that were going on. And it's such a higher order that it's hard to comprehend.
It really is. And people say, what's your argument for God when you see so much evil in the world? But the reason there's evil is because God allows us to make a choice. I mean, he could have programmed us all to be robots, and we would just go through life like the, what's that movie about the Stepford wives? Y'all seen that movie about these wives that were basically robots programmed to behave as their husbands wanted them to? If that were the case, could there possibly be love? There's no way. Love has to be a choice. It's a good point, because we're not talking about a feeling. We're not talking about emotion. It involves feelings and emotion, but we're not talking about love that is a feeling. We're talking about love that is a decision. God told him to love her. God cannot command feelings. That's not the way he works with us. That's not the way he built us, but he can command behaviors. And so he was telling Hosea, you behave towards her with love. You treat her with love. That's what love is. It's a decision we make that can be acted out based on our will to do it, regardless of how you feel. You can behave lovingly towards someone when inside you'd really rather rip their heads off. I know that seems backwards, but it really is true. And it has to be that way. And that requires even more faith of us. Because if God tells me to do something that I already want to do, well, that's no big deal. I mean, it's a big deal, but it's easy for me to do it because I already want to do that. But if he tells me to do something that I don't want to do,
But you know, if you do that and you keep on doing that, you will change.
that's absolutely right. Because it's the truth. It's the truth. It's like when somebody's trying to train you to do something and you don't feel like, I don't think that's the right way to do it, but that's how the person who knows told me to do it, and you start doing it, that you find, oh, this does work. This is the right way to do it. I remember we were doing barnyard wrestling to raise money. I think I told you this story at some point. Maybe some of you weren't here. You don't want to miss this story. It's a really good one. But I wasn't on the wrestling team. I was in the band. I was smart. The reason I say that is because I went to our 10-year reunion, and all the guys who were the jocks came in hobbling on bad knees and hips, and I come strutting right in, you know. Anyway, they had a fundraiser, and they said, what we're going to do is we're going to get guys to volunteer to wrestle. We're going to have a wrestling match. And so I wrestled with this young guy. I didn't know him. He was a nice kid. But I had a friend who was on the wrestling team, Leonard Lovejoy. He lived up the holler from me. And so I'm wrestling this guy, and I'm on top, and I'm thinking, but I can't take him. I can't roll him over. And Leonard kept yelling, grab his arm, Marty. And that's not going to help, Leonard. I didn't say that because I was busy at the time. But I don't know how many times I heard him say, grab his arm, grab his arm. And finally, it just, all right, Leonard, I'll grab his arm. And I grabbed his arm. God, I went down. He rolled over. Wow. I couldn't see it. But he saw it. And God sees it. And he says, this is the way you need to live. And, oh, I don't want to live like that. And when we're training our children, it's the same thing. Say please, say thank you. They don't want to do it. Why not? Because it's just not in their nature. They are people of flesh just like we are, and they're so little they don't have the maturity to realize, there might be a better way than the way I think I'm supposed to do it, or feel I'm supposed to do it, and that's really what it is with kids. They feel like, and that's how they want to behave. We have to train them, discipline them, bring them up to know there is a better way. When somebody gives you something, you say, thank you. When you want something from someone, you don't demand it, you don't take it, you approach them, you request it, ask for it, and then you say, please. And if you don't get it, you don't throw a fit either. Don't ask me how I know this stuff. But at any rate, this is God working with us. He's trying to get us to understand there's a better way. And we keep looking at Assyria, we keep looking at Egypt, we keep thinking, oh, these other nations, they're so cool. They're not cool. They're not cool. They're practicing a way that's going to lead to death. And as shiny and slick as it might look to us, it's not going to get it done.
God's teaching that all actions have consequences.
Absolutely.
And these consequences are good if you do His will. Bad.
Yes. And it's that way with so many things. You get a recipe book and you're making biscuits. Oh, I think I'll put in 2 cups of oil. instead of 1 cup of oil because I like oil. Whatever. Just as we're closing, chapter 8. I knew we wouldn't get through all 14 chapters, even the high points, so let's, now, but make a note of it. Read chapter 14. Chapter 14 is the glorious close, the promise of hope for the future. Chapter 14 is fantastic, but for us, I want us to look at chapter 8. Put the trumpet to your lips. Like an eagle, the enemy comes against the house of the Lord because they have transgressed my covenant and rebelled against my law. They cry out to me, my God, we of Israel know you. Israel has rejected the good. The enemy will pursue him. They have set up kings, but not by me. They have appointed princes, but I didn't know it. With their silver and gold, they have made idols for themselves, that they might be cut off. He has rejected your calf, O Samaria, saying, my anger burns against them. How long will they be incapable of innocence? For from Israel is even this. A craftsman made it, so it is not of God. Surely the calf of Samaria will be broken to pieces, for they sow the wind and they reap the whirlwind. The standing grain has no heads, it yields no grain. Should it yield, strangers would swallow it up. What's he saying? Sown to the wind, what are you going to reap? The whirlwind. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. That's a physical law in nature. In the creation, it's also a spiritual law. As you sow, so shall ye reap. What does Jezreel mean? God sows. God sows. He is sowing judgment, sowing the seeds of judgment because Israel will not change. But he's also sowing seeds of hope for those who will, for those who do. Remember when Jesus came, 700 some years after Hosea preached, Israel was there. There was a restoration. There was a remnant. There was a great judgment in between, but there was a remnant that returned, and glorious it was. Observations, questions, comments as we close? I hope in all of this, in every week, you're going to say, wow, that prophet was relevant to what's going on today, because every single one of them are. Thank you so much. Oh, yes, Billy?
Put the trumpet to your lips, that's a warning.
Absolutely.
Something's fixing to happen here, and you need to wake up and pay attention.
Right. When people heard the trumpet, I mean, they didn't have the news to tell them what was happening or make them try to think something was happening. When they heard the trumpet, they knew, wow, something's up. Thank you so much.